least because of the commemorative hearings that have been taking place in the inquiry, all of the pain and the suffering, the horror, the tragedy of that day has been brought to life again for the families who live with it every single day of the week. I welcome the fact that the Irish Government is committed to cooperate with the Omagh inquiry. I look forward to the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding. It is for the Irish Government to decide what inquiries they wish to establish in relation to events in the Republic.
Gregory Capp.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
The Secretary of State has met with suppliers, and my officials meet regularly with horticultural industry representatives. The next meeting of the Horticultural Working Group is in 2 days' time, and the Government is committed to addressing the outstanding issues on horticultural products to ensure that these can move safely within the UK.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The situation does remain very, very difficult. In fact, the Horticultural Trades Association said that it remains impossible for some retailers who are trying to order product from GB-based companies to consumers in Northern Ireland. Everyone can complain about this. Some of us are trying to do something about it. The government are the people who can bring pressure to bear to resolve this. What action has been taken to try and resolve this problem for consumers in Northern Ireland?
Minister.
DEFRA officials are following up specifically with those companies that are most affected, for example, seed shipping companies. Shipping seeds is allowed using phytosanitary certificates, but posting business to business is currently smoother than business to consumer. So, ways to find solutions to this are being worked out within the requirements of the Windsor Framework, and guidance should be updated shortly.
Chair of the Select Committee, Tony Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for her answer, but we want to know more detail around the progress that the Horticultural Working Group is making to help to resolve these issues with plants and cut flowers from the movements of GB to NI under the Windsor Framework. So can she please update it as a matter of urgency?
Minister.
I can provide more updates, but for example, on the banned plants, they're being worked through species by species. There were 11 in 2023, 10 in 2024, and we're working through each one of those. So the working group is taking each of the issues on a case-by-case basis and working through each of those issues as it arises.
Alex Easton.
Mr. Speaker, could I ask the Minister about veterinary medical supplies for Northern Ireland with the grace period about to run out within the next year? What are the plans to make sure that Northern Ireland doesn't run out of veterinary medicines?
Minister.
We're working actively to narrow the range of products where there's a problem, but working with each one of those as well. So this is an active consideration, knowing that, as the member points out, the deadline is approaching.
Lee Ingham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Windsor Framework was a distinct improvement on the old Northern Ireland Protocol. But does the Minister agree with me that to ensure the smoothest possible movement of agri-food products across the Irish Sea, it's vital we secure an SPS agreement with the EU?
I agree with my right honourable friend that the Windsor Framework is a big improvement on the Northern Ireland Protocol, and we are committed to implementing the Windsor Framework at the same time as seeking to negotiate an SPS agreement that would provide further improvements to the movement of agri-food products. And we must pave the way to this by resetting our relationship with the EU and implementing the Windsor Framework in good faith.
Sir Desmond Swig.
Number 6, sir.
Service Day.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 6 and 11 together. The approach taken by the previous government to legacy was wrong. It caused immense pain to victims and survivors, and in many respects has been found to be unlawful. In December, I laid a proposal for a draft remedial order to address the human rights deficiencies in the Act identified by the courts, and when parliamentary time allows, I will introduce primary legislation to reinstate legacy inquests halted by the Act and to reform and strengthen the ICRIR.
Sir Desmond.
Why did he abandon the appeal in Dillon and Oars?
Great question. Because clauses 46 and 47 were found to be unlawful, and as he will be aware, the case that gave rise to the attempt to deal with the problem by those clauses have now been found to be unlawful, came from a Supreme Court judgment in 2020. And for two and a bit years, the previous government was unable to find a solution.
Gagan Mahendra.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Notwithstanding the Northern Ireland Secretary's response just there, why is this Labour government continue to undermine the tough action taken by the Conservative government on individuals who have acted against our democracy and society, such as Gerry Adams, by considering repealing the Legacy Act, giving him and others the possibility of a six-figure payout?
Well, as I've indicated to the House at the last Northern Ireland oral questions, nobody wants to see that happen. We are currently working to find a lawful way of dealing with the problems that were created by the way in which the original interim custody orders were signed in 1972 and I think 1973, which the Supreme Court in 2020 found, where they were not signed and considered by the Secretary of State, were not lawful.
Louise Haig.
In 2019, Boris Johnson commissioned the Shawcross report into Libyan-sponsored IRA terrorism. US citizens have received compensation from the Libyan government for attacks on British soil, but UK citizens never have. Will the Secretary of State work with the FCDO to ensure that the Shawcross report is published?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for raising this, and the whole House will have profound sympathy for all the victims of Gaddafi-sponsored IRA terrorism and all the victims of the Troubles. The Shawcross report was commissioned by the previous government as an internal report, and decisions on the report and its future are currently under review by the FCDO.
Go through, yeah. Shadow Minister Mike Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People right across the United Kingdom will be disgusted if former terrorists like Gerry Adams get compensation from the taxpayer because of Labour's decision to repeal the Legacy Act without putting something in its place. Will the Secretary of State finally commit to legislating immediately to prevent this from happening?
Well, I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave a moment ago on that issue.
Right. We now come to Prime Minister's questions. We start with Dr. Luke Evans.
Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week marked 3 years since Putin's barbaric invasion of Ukraine. The courage of the Ukrainians is inspiring, and across this House we stand with them for as long as it takes. Mr. Speaker, that's why we're increasing defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by April 2027, with an ambition to reach 3% in the next Parliament as economic and fiscal conditions allow. And this afternoon, of course, I will travel to the US to have discussions with President Trump about the enduring security partnership between our two countries. Mr. Speaker, I'm also delighted that we've announced the first 750 schools to start offering free breakfast clubs. This is our plan for change in action, ensuring every child has the chance to thrive. And Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will want to join me in thanking Amanda Pritchard for her services as Chief Executive of the NHS England, and I wish her well for the future. This morning, Mr. Speaker, I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dr. Luca.
Could the Prime Minister tell this House whether the outcome of his budget was by design or by mistake? Did he mean to push 100,000 pensioners into poverty with his own analysis when he removed the winter fuel allowance, or was that a mistake? Did he mean to decimate family farming when he changed the inheritance tax, or was that a mistake? And did he mean to tax GPs, care homes and hospices when he raised NICs, or was that a mistake? Prime Minister, could he tell the House, are these acceptable collateral damage in his path for change, or simply a mistake that need rectifying?
I'll tell you what was a mistake, leaving a £22 billion black hole that we had to sort out. We took the difficult decisions, investing in our NHS, and I would have thought he would have welcomed the 2 million extra appointments that we've achieved in the first 7 months of a Labour government. That's the difference our budget is making to people.
Alex McIntyre.
excited that Calton and Grange primary schools in my city of Gloucester will be part of the first 750 schools to get free breakfast clubs. And I'm pleased that this government is already delivering on its manifesto promises in less than a year. So will the Prime Minister agree with me that by helping working parents with childcare and delivering the best start to the day for every single child, we are delivering opportunity for the next generation?
Well, I agree, my honourable friend. We're pleased that 2 of the early adopter schools will be in his constituency. Mr. Speaker, we're ensuring that all primary school children aged can get access to free breakfast and at least 30 minutes of free childcare. And that means every child ready to learn, and parents, of course, supported with up to £450 a year back in their pockets. That's the change a Labour government makes.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Badenoch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish the Prime Minister every success on his trip to Washington. The visit to see President Trump must serve our national interest. The Prime Minister and I are completely united in our support for Ukraine as a proud and sovereign nation. Yeah. What specific steps will he take to ensure Ukraine is at the negotiating table for any peace settlement?
Well, I thank her for her words about the forthcoming trip. And it is right, and I think the whole House will think it's right, that Ukraine must be at the table at negotiations. There can be no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine. That has been my consistent position in all of the discussions that I've had. That will continue to be my position, because this is about the sovereignty of Ukraine and their ability to decide for themselves the future of their country. So they must be at the table.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for that answer, and as I said, I wish him every success. We want to support him on this issue. So turning to the details of the plan he set out yesterday. Over the weekend, I suggested to the Prime Minister that he cut the aid budget, and I'm pleased that he accepted my advice. Mr. Speaker, it's the fastest response. It's the fastest response I've ever had from the Prime Minister. However, he announced £13.4 billion in additional defence spending yesterday. This morning, his Defence Secretary said the uplift is only £6 billion, which is the correct figure.
Prime Minister.
I'm going to have to let the Leader of the Opposition down gently. She didn't feature in my thinking at all. I was so busy over the weekend I didn't even see her proposal. I think she's appointed herself, I think, saviour of the Western civilization. It's a desperate search for relevance. But, Mr. Speaker, look, if you take the numbers for this financial year and then the numbers for the financial year 27-28, that's £13.4 billion increase. That is the largest sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War, which will put us in a position to ensure the security and defence of our country and of Europe.
Mr. Speaker, that wasn't very clear. How is it that the Defence Secretary says £6 billion and he says £13.4 billion? The IFS said today that the government is playing silly games with numbers. How does he find this difference in numbers?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we went through this 2 weeks ago, going through the same question over and over again. So let me say it. If you take the financial year this year, and then you take the financial year for 2027-28, the difference between the two is £13.4 billion. That's the same answer. If you ask again, I'll give the same answer again.
I'll decide when it's more.
Mr. Speaker, someone needs to tell the Prime Minister that being patronising is not a substitute. Not a substitute for answering questions. It's not a substitute. He hasn't answered. What he has said is different from what he said yesterday. We are still not clear where the money is coming from. We want to support him. He's also said that we should put British troops on the ground in Ukraine. We haven't seen the detail of any proposals. Would his new spending plans allow him to fund this commitment effectively?
Prime Minister.
I mean, I think it's the same question again. It's 13.4 billion. That's the difference between this year and 2020. She asked a serious question about the security guarantees in Ukraine, and that is extremely important, because the worst of all outcomes, if there's to be a cessation of hostilities, is that it is a short break rather than sustained and lasting peace. And I think that that means there's got to be security guarantees. I've indicated that we will play our full part. There has to be US backing, because otherwise I don't think it will deter Putin. We are working on that. I'm having extensive discussions about it, not in a position to put details before the House, as she well knows today, but I'll continue down that route, because I want a lasting peace in Ukraine and Europe for the safety and security of Ukrainians, of Europeans, and of course for everybody in this country.
Mr. Speaker, this is an endeavour that we want to support him in, but we need to know exactly what it is we're supporting. We need clarity and transparency over the money. We also need to know where this money is going. This morning, the Defence Secretary could not say if the Chagos deal would come out of the defence budget. Can he confirm to the House that none of the defence uplift includes payments for his Chagos deal?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the additional spend I announced yesterday is for our capability on defence and security in Europe, as I made absolutely clear yesterday. The Chagos deal is extremely important for our security, for US security. The US are rightly looking at it. When it's finalised, I'll put it before the House with the costings. The figures being bandied around are absolutely wild of the mark. The deal is well over a century, but the funding I announced yesterday is for our capability to put ourselves in a position to rise to a generational challenge. That is what that money is all about, and I thought she supported it.
Kemi, Badenoch.
Speaker, we need to make sure we are supporting a plan that is clear and transparent. Yesterday, the Prime Minister set an ambition for defence spending to reach 3% in the next Parliament. We agree with him, but this could be 2034, almost a decade away. That is too slow. We don't know how he will pay for it. We cannot raise taxes further. We already pay more on debt interest than defence, and everyone in this House would have heard him not answer the last question. So I will ask him again. Is he paying for the Chagos deal with this defence uplift or not?
Prime Minister.
Speaker, I've just dealt with that question. She gave her... The money announced yesterday is going to our capability to put ourselves in a position to defend the security of our country, Europe and the UK. And she asked about defence spending. She gave what people have described as a rambling speech yesterday when she couldn't say what defence spending should be. We've been absolutely clear. We've set it out, a full, credible, costed plan, and I thought she supported it.
Holly Billington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware that in coastal communities like mine in East Thanet, people develop cancer earlier, get treated and diagnosed later, and die younger. Can he give the House an update on the plans for the government to implement the recommendations by the Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, into tackling poor health in our seaside towns?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank her for raising this. She's right that cancer patients are waiting too long for diagnosis and for treatment. Addressing healthcare inequity is part of our 10-year health plan, Mr. Speaker, aiming to halve the gap in healthy life expectancy between the richest and the poorest regions. And we're making progress on that already.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I start by wishing the Prime Minister well on his trip to the White House. It won't be an easy meeting, but we're all behind him for our national interest. But it's already clear that under President Trump, we won't be able to rely on the United States, sadly, to help ensure our security against Russian aggression. And that's why we strongly welcome the Prime Minister's decision to increase Britain's defence spending. But Europe must do far more to rearm in the face of Putin's threat, and the UK must lead on that. That's why we back the idea of a new European rearmament bank, so we can finance a big increase in the manufacturing capacity without the need to cut Britain's vital soft power. So will the Prime Minister look at this idea, work across this House and across Europe, so we can make a European rearmament bank actually happen?
Prime Minister.
I'll resist his suggestion that we've got somehow to choose between the US and our European partners. I do not believe that to be the case, and I want to strengthen our already strong relationship with the US, because I think it's vital that we do so. I, of course, want to work with our European allies on defence capability and what more we need to do in relation to capability, coordination and funding. And in the longer term, there is a discussion going on amongst allies as to future funding. We're part of that discussion, and I'm happy to share that with the House as it evolves.
Sir Ed Davey.
I hope he's successful in keeping the US on board with our European allies, and I'm glad he's talking about finance and defence. I think if he was to push this European Rearmament Bank at the summit on Sunday, the European leaders, I think he'd be pushing an open door. Certainly, Prime Minister Tusk is supporting from the Polish point of view. But, Mr. Speaker, if I can turn now to domestic matters and the cost of living crisis that's hitting so many of our constituents. Families in my constituency are really angry that Thames Water is sending them bills this April that will cost them £150 a year more. Thames has already let down so many people, whether it's leaking pipes or pumping their filthy sewage into our rivers. A third of customers' bills are already used just to pay the interest on Thames Water's debt, and now it's going to borrow £3 billion more. Isn't it time to stop making people pay for bailing out the vulture funds drowning Thames Water in debt? Will his government just put this firm out of its misery, put it into special administration so we can sort out that mess and the mess that lot left?
Well, he's certainly right about the mess that lot made. We've obviously got the water bill. It's got very strong measures in it, and I think he supports them.
Dr. Rosanna Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have heard extraordinary rhetoric coming out of Washington in recent days, and we have seen fascist salutes on our screens. We have witnessed wild statements about Palestinians being expelled from Gaza, and we have seen our allies labelled dictators. Britain's interests are best served by standing with Ukraine, working closely with our European allies, by upholding international law and remaining a strong part of NATO. Can the Prime Minister assure us that this will form a central part of his message when he meets world leaders this week?
Minister.
Well, we certainly stand with Ukraine, and I think I speak for the whole House when I say that. And as I set out yesterday, NATO is the bedrock of our security. It's been our most important alliance for many, many years, as important today as it's ever been. And we build that alliance by working with the US. We have a special and deep relationship with the US. That's not just words, that's to do with security, defence, intelligence capability, vitally important for both sides. But we also work with our European allies, and it is that ability to work with the US and the EU and European partners that has held the peace for so many years and needs to hold the peace for many years to come.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prior to the election, the Labour Party promised to reduce energy bills by £300, yet on their watch, energy bills are about to increase by almost £300. So may I ask, is the failure to keep that promise a consequence of government incompetency, or have the Labour Party been caught lying to the public?
Hear, hear. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we're very proud of the fact that we are pushing forward for energy independence, which will keep our bills lower. And he knows very well what my position is. But I note that, again, he's very quiet on the SNP record. And I'll tell you for why. Just this week, we've seen the attainment gap widen in Scotland. Pupils leaving schools with no qualifications rising, those from deprived areas going to work falling. Instead of playing the politics of grievance, they need to take responsibility for their own record.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Mike Addison was one of a kind, a physical disability rugby league world champion with England and Warrington Wolves, and an avid volunteer for the club and foundation. He was a friend to everyone who knew him. Tragically, he died at age 45, having taken his own life. One death by suicide is too many, and every suicide is preventable. But ONS data puts the rate in the North West at over double the rate of London, and with a 17% increase last year. So can the Prime Minister outline what more can be done working across government to help Warrington meet our target of eliminating suicide?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank her for raising this tragic case? And my thoughts, I'm sure the thoughts of the House, are with the family, friends and teammates of Mike at Warrington Wolves. I mean, she's right, Mr. Speaker, that one death by suicide is one too many, and reducing the number is a vital part of our health mission. We are recruiting an additional 8,500 mental health workers, especially trained to support people at risk of suicide. We're committed to taking forward the suicide prevention strategy for England. I'm sure this is something the whole House will support.
Dr Neil Butts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's statement committing us to increased defence spending and reaffirming the UK's support for Ukraine and their democratically elected leader, President Zelensky. Yeah. A wartime leader, like Winston Churchill, who also had to delay elections because his country faced an existential threat. As the Prime Minister travels to Washington, with this House and the country willing him to succeed, will he invoke the legacy of Churchill in making the case for the UK to be the key in bridging transatlantic relations, to bring us all together for the sake of freedom and democracy across the world?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for his question. Can I pick up on both elements? Because President Zelensky is a democratically elected leader, and suspending elections was precisely what we did in this country when we were fighting in the Second World War. And secondly, on his point, yes, I do think that the UK has successfully been a bridge between the US and Europe for many, many years. It's vital that we continue in that role, and that's why my message to President Trump is that the relationship between our two countries needs to go from strength to strength. It's all very strong, but also working at the same time with our European allies.
Jessica T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Monday night, there was a brutal double stabbing in my constituency. This adds to a long line of horrific knife attacks that have included 3 fatalities over the past 2 years. I know the Prime Minister is aware of the particular challenges we face in Bournemouth, and while crime has been going down, I know there is much more he will want to do. So will he join me in praising the crucial work that organisations like Changes Are Made, who give positive activities like boxing to young people, and will he share what more the government can do to tackle knife crime in communities like mine?
Prime Minister.
Thank you for raising this really important issue. Yesterday we introduced our crime and policing bill, which is central to our plan for change and halving knife crime. It involves new powers to seize and destroy knives found on private property and a new criminal offence of possessing a bladed article with intent to cause harm. Plus, Mr. Speaker, tougher penalties for selling dangerous weapons to under-18s, stricter rules for online sales under Ronan's law, and we'll continue with that work.
Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The floods of 2013-14 devastated Datchet, Horton and Wraysbury, and the flooding last January wasn't much better. But shockingly, the River Thames scheme as currently proposed continues to leave my constituents at risk. The Council was asked to cough up tens of millions, but like very many, is cash-strapped. Does the Prime Minister, therefore, agree with me that the only option to protect my constituents is funding Channel 1 of the River Thames scheme as the national strategic infrastructure, which it really is?
Prime Minister.
Well, I know the honourable member has raised this issue before, and it's obviously an important issue for his constituents. We inherited flood defences in their worst state on record, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're investing £2.6 billion to protect over 50,000 properties. I understand that the options to reduce flood risk to these communities are being considered as part of the Datchet and Hythe End Flood Alleviation Scheme, and I'll ensure that he has a meeting with the relevant minister to take forward the work.
Sally Jameson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In order for the government's growth agenda to be a success, it must be felt in all areas of the country, including Doncaster and South Yorkshire, where we have green growth transport companies, including hybrid air vehicles and clean power hydrogen, alongside the reopening of Doncaster Sheffield Airport. So will the Prime Minister put on his record support for Mayor Ros Jones, who has led on the airport reopening, and also set out how the growth agenda will override those traditional patterns of investment, mainly in the south of England, and bring prosperity to South Yorkshire and indeed the north as a whole?
Yes, I will. Doncaster's got a proud industrial heritage, rail, steel and coal, an extraordinary potential for industries of the future from hydrogen to AI. And we are focused, Mr Speaker, on devolving more power and funding to metro mayors to support regional industry. We will work with the mayors of Doncaster and South Yorkshire to support efforts to reopen Doncaster Sheffield Airport.
Graham Ledbetter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I have the privilege to represent the home of Speyside malts, some amongst the finest Scotch whiskies. Last week, the UK Government unveiled damaging plans to grant a different definition of single malt to English producers to that of Scottish single malts. This is entirely inconsistent with the global reputation of the quality of single malts and seeks to tear up a well-established definition of what a single malt is, pulling the rug yet further from underneath the Scotch whisky industry. Given the backlash from the industry to this and the damage this could cause to Scotch whisky exports and jobs, will the Prime Minister's word on whisky be his whisky bond by backing the industry to the hilt and scrapping these plans?
Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, we do support Scotch whisky. It's a really important part of our economy, and that's why we allocated £5 million in the budget and why we're working with Brazil, which is worth £25 million for Scotch whisky. It's what we're doing to support industry and sectors in Scotland. And in addition to that, in another sector, at the weekend I was very pleased to be able to announce the £200 million investment in Grangemouth and the future for generations there.
Steve Race.
Speaker, yesterday I returned from Ukraine, having spent 4 days with a cross-party delegation of parliamentarians. The Ukrainians we met from across society had one simple message. They were deeply thankful for our partnership, and they want us to know that they can overcome the Russian invasion because they must. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that alongside our welcome 100-year partnership, now is the time for the UK to redouble our efforts alongside our European partners to help secure Ukraine's future as a free, democratic and sovereign European nation?
Yes, I do, and I'm really proud of the way the United Kingdom has risen to the challenge of the last 3 years in a united way, both in terms of the capability and funding that we provided to Ukraine, but also the throwing open of homes here for those fleeing. And I was privileged to welcome some of the families to Downing Street on Monday, and it was a human reminder of the impact that it's having on them, their children and their families.
Dr Kieran Millen.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. The whole House wants the Prime Minister's meeting with President Trump to be a success, which requires credibility on our defence spending commitments. The Leader of the Opposition gave the Prime Minister an opportunity to unambiguously rule out the funding of any Chagos deal coming from the defence budget, and I'm not clear that he did that. I want him to be taken seriously in Washington, so I'll make it really easy for him. Will he rule out the funding of any Chagos deal coming from the defence budget, yes or no?
Yes. Prime Minister.
Speaker, as I said, when the deal is complete, I will put it before the House with the costings. The money yesterday was allocated to our capability, the single biggest increase, sustained increase in defence spending since the Cold War.
Diane Abbott.
The whole country stands behind the people of Ukraine. But there is also a view that taking money from aid and development to spend on armaments and tanks makes people less safe, not more safe, because the desperation and the poverty that so often leads to warfare is what aid and development money is supposed to counter.
Mr Speaker, as I said yesterday, the overseas development is important. I'm proud of what we've done. It wasn't a decision I took lightly or I wanted to take, but it is important at this moment that we put the defence spending, the defence and security of our country and Europe uppermost. We will, of course, make sure that we're able to fulfil our humanitarian obligations in relation to Gaza, Ukraine and Sudan and other vital work. And I want to be clear that we do, of course, want to go back and increase that funding as soon as we're able to do so.
Simon Hall.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I hope the Prime Minister knows that when he does travel to Washington to meet the former leader of the free world, he does so with the hopes and prayers of this House and the country. Probably no more serious a meeting could be taking place. Now, whilst Ukraine will clearly dominate, will the Prime Minister undertake to raise with President Trump that Canada is a valued, respected and much-loved member of both NATO and our Commonwealth, and that this childish nonsense of a 51st state should be called out by the Prime Minister for what it is?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising this issue. UK and Canada are close allies and have been for a very long time, with a partnership based on a shared history and a shared set of values, and a determination to be an active force for good in the world. We work closely with them on issues of the Commonwealth, on NATO, and of course Five Eyes, intelligence sharing, and we will work to strengthen that relationship.
Michelle Scrockham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Barrow-in-Furness has always been ahead of the times in terms of high-skilled engineering. In light of the Prime Minister's historic commitment to rise defence spending, the biggest increase since the end of the Cold War, I invite him to visit and see the many SMEs who could support this vital supply chain. Does he agree that investing in these businesses will not only deliver our nuclear deterrent, but improve security and the economy for us all?
Well, I thank her for raising this question, and we'll obviously consider her invitation. Defence spending, Mr. Speaker, already supports more than 430,000 jobs across the United Kingdom, and I'd like to recognise the contribution made by the workers in Barrow-in-Furness.
Wendy Morton.
Mr. Speaker, in my constituency, the planning inspector chose to use the term grey belt to pass a battery energy storage system application before the order was laid in this House to change the NPPF, and without recognising the moratorium for local authorities to manage their local plans. This decision failed to recognise the green belt that protects us against urban sprawl, and it failed to recognise the proximity to a school, a church and a graveyard. So can the Prime Minister define what grey belt actually is, or is it simply a grey area to allow for inappropriate development?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not across the details of the individual case that she raises, as she will understand, but I am in favour of making sure that we can have the infrastructure and the houses that we need to grow our economy. And one of the problems we had in the last 14 years was an assertional rhetoric that we wanted homes and infrastructure, but when the decision all that came up, the answer was always no. The answer cannot always be no.
John McDonnell.
Can I thank the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary for their efforts to secure the release of Allah Abdel Fattah, the human rights campaign, the British human rights campaigner who's been imprisoned in Egypt now for over 10 years. The Prime Minister will know, because he's met the family, that his mother is on the 150th day of her hunger strike and her health is failing rapidly. Could I ask the Prime Minister to pick up the phone to President Sisi and seek the release of Allah to save his life, also that of his mother's?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for raising this really important case, and as he says, I did meet the mother and the family just a few days ago, and it is an incredibly difficult situation for them, and I can assure him I will do everything I can to ensure the release in this case, and that includes phone calls as necessary. I've raised it before, I'll raise it again, we raise it and will continue to do so. I gave my word to the family that that's what I do, that I will do, and I will.
Hannah.
People in Northern Ireland are sick to the teeth of paramilitaries, of the menace, of the sectarianism and of keeping people stuck in the past. In light of the announcement yesterday on transition, does the Prime Minister recognise that people will be highly sceptical of this process, that there must be real learnings from the failed transitions of the past, that there can be no rewards for paramilitaries for hanging on, robust criminal justice, the flags off the lampposts and on street corners, and community-funded policing to allow communities that have been brutalised by paramilitaries to finally look forward to a confident and shared future?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank you for raising this important and obviously sensitive issue? We are committed to making progress towards ending paramilitarism once and for all in Northern Ireland, and that's why we've agreed to support a short independent exercise to look at a formal process, and I'll make sure that the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland keeps her updated.
Rishi Sunak.
Mr. Speaker, prostate cancer is now our country's most common cancer, and yet there is no national screening programme. We made progress towards this in government, but yet there is more to do, which is why I'm delighted to have joined Prostate Cancer Research, the charity, as an ambassador. I'm grateful to the Health Secretary for his engagement thus far, and could I ask the Prime Minister to ensure that we do have a targeted national screening programme for the most at-risk groups of prostate cancer, so that we can not only save the NHS money, make progress towards the government's early diagnosis targets, but most crucially, save thousands of lives?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank him for raising this, and can I thank him for using his authority and reputation to support this vital cause, which will make a material difference, and I look forward to working with him on it. We do share a commitment to detecting prostate cancer earlier and treating it faster, and we must do that. Our National Cancer Plan will improve the way we treat cancer right across the country, and I'll make sure he's fully informed of the steps that we're taking, and we'll work with him.
Will Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister join with me in wishing all Welsh citizens everywhere a very happy St David's Day on Saturday? And will he also join with me in welcoming the latest news of the £600 million investment by Copenhagen infrastructure partners to ensure that Bute Energy and Green Gen Cymru can take forward the bold ambition to achieve 100% green electricity production by 2035 in Wales, thus providing much-needed sustainable green jobs for the people of Wales?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I wish her and her constituents a very happy St David's Day and join her in welcoming this significant new investment into her constituency that will ensure good jobs, well-paid, skilled jobs, and, of course, the transition to energy security and lower bills. And I know her constituency will play a vital role in that.
Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree that our biggest single foreign policy priority is the preservation of NATO with America at its heart? And if so, following his welcome announcement yesterday, is the next step to talk to our European allies and for all of us to agree to spend 3% of GDP on defence within a specified timescale, so that we can look the President in the eye and say that Europe is finally pulling its weight on defence?
Prime Minister.
Well, I agree with him entirely in terms of the priority in terms of NATO. Putin thought he could weaken NATO. He's only made it stronger and larger. NATO's strength comes from the US and European partners and others working together, and that is absolutely the focus of my work at the moment. It is right, as he says, that European countries, including the United Kingdom, do need to do more on capability, on coordination, and on defence spend. That must be not seen as a project separate to NATO, but part of an essential project that ensures that NATO is there for decades and decades to come, preserving the peace, just as it has been for 75 years.
Final question, Newman Steinbeck.
Mr. Speaker, the Grangemouth refinery closure has loomed over central Scotland since Petronas' announcement in November 2023. 2 weeks ago, Scottish Labour colleagues and I met with the National Wealth Fund to make the case for investment in Grangemouth. I strongly welcome the exceptional commitment this Labour government has shown in Grangemouth by committing £200 million from the National Wealth Fund. Can I ask the Prime Minister what steps the government will be taking to secure permanent, good jobs at Grangemouth?
Well, can I thank him for being such a great champion for Scotland and his constituency? Mr. Speaker, Grangemouth is really important to communities in Scotland, to the economy in Scotland. It's not a charity case. It's got incredible potential, huge opportunity, and that's why at the weekend I was very pleased to announce £200 million from the National Wealth Fund to incentivise private investment. That, of course, Mr. Speaker, follows £100 million in the growth deal that we announced earlier. This is about jobs for decades to come in Grangemouth. It's a really exciting opportunity, and we intend to seize it.
I hope His Presidency of the Assembly of North Macedonia, His Excellency Mr Afrim Gasha, enjoyed questions. Right, that completes PMQs.